Yeah, I think I've always been a leader. I've always been able to inspire and engage other people to help to move toward a worthy goal and ambition. And I think over time, I've done a lot of that in the space of helping people that wanted to really grow and scale their business and really help them understand what they're trying to achieve and make good decisions along the way. So
he is focused helping us today converting or transitioning or advancing from a real estate syndication model to a fund model.
in many ways, there's just more plates that you have to spin in order to be able to be successful if you're doing it in a pooled fund format.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Build to Billions podcast, where we believe many entrepreneurs, investors, sometimes they struggle with clarifying how to scale their business from millions to billions, focusing on stewardship versus ownership. We want to learn from some of the best in the country of what they do. My name is Brett Swartz. I'm founder of Capital Gains Tax Solutions, and I am your host today for the Build to Billions podcast. I'm excited about our next guest. He's out of Portland, Oregon. He is the founder of Verivest, FundSom, and Fairway America. As the CEO of a few of these companies and such, he is focused on helping us today converting or transitioning or advancing from a real estate syndication model to a fund model. He has a huge background in GP, co-invest, multifamily office, industrial, retail, hospitality. He's also the author of Capital Attraction, the Small Balance Real Estate and Entrepreneur's Essential Guide to Raising Capital, and so much more. Please welcome to the show with me, Matt Burk. Matt, how are we doing?
Doing great, Brett. Thank you so much for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for our listeners getting to know you for the first time, would you give us just a little bit more about your story and your current focus?
Yeah, I think background is I've been in real estate finance for 30 plus years now, and kind of went from doing mortgage brokerage in the early days to private money lending to setting up and running multiple pooled investment funds. And the last 10 years or so, we've done a lot of advisory work helping other entrepreneurs set up their own pooled investment fund, all real estate based. We have a fund advisory and administration business where we help people set them up, help them do the accounting, the back office work, help them position themselves to raise capital as well as they can in a pooled investment fund format. So yeah, a lot of different stuff, but all focused on real estate.
Excellent. Love that background. It's unique, and I think it's going to be super valuable. Before we dive into advancing from syndication to a fund pooled model for scaling your real estate business, I want to take one other step back, Matt. I believe we've all been given certain gifts, and these gifts have been given to us to be a blessing, help to others. Some people call them superpower strengths. I'm curious, what would you say is, Matt, growing up, what was your one or two super strength, superpower, and how does that help how you help and bless people today?
Yeah, I think I've always been a leader. I've always been able to inspire and engage other people to help to move toward a worthy goal and ambition. And I think over time, I've done a lot of that in the space of helping people that wanted to really grow and scale their business and really help them understand what they're trying to achieve and make good decisions along the way. So I felt like that's probably what comes to mind first, Brett.
Excellent. With that being in mind, let's focus on the topic at hand, which is advancing from syndication to the fund model. So Matt, what's the number one secret to doing just that?
Yeah, well, I think you have to be committed to doing it. It's a big step for people to go from raising capital one deal at a time to doing it in a pooled fund format. There's a lot to learn. And I use this analogy a lot, Brett. It's kind of like having kids. You can babysit your niece and nephew, and you can read parenting books and you can do all of that, but you really don't fully know what it's like to have kids until you've actually had them. And even then there's a progression, right? To go from infant to toddler to elementary school and all the way up, right? And there's just different stages along the way. So I try to help as best I can, knowing full well that they'll have to go on their own journey, but help prepare people for what that journey is going to be like. So number one thing is, be committed. There's a lot of other things I could rattle off on things that are conducive, when you should and shouldn't set up a fund, but I'd say that's the number one thing.
So it sounds like when you're in a syndication, it's more like I don't want to say babysit is the right word, because it is definitely a commitment, and it is perhaps for a 3 to 5 year term, but it is very in the box, a single property, right? A set number of investors, a single loan, right? And it's you have your quarterly distributions, your quarterly newsletters, your profit and loss statements. It probably is a joint venture LLC of some sort. But walk us through what it takes to really shift that commitment, or what have the best done to make it as smooth as possible.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference, and I don't mean to at all imply that syndicating is easy or not, a viable model. It certainly is. In fact, for a lot of people, I think they're better off to just syndicate indefinitely than necessarily start a fund. But I would say a fund is an order of magnitude more complicated in ways that the syndications just don't have to deal with. So, namely, you have multiple investors coming in at multiple points in time. You have multiple properties coming in and out at multiple points in time, right? And to be able to do the documents for that, to structure it properly, to make the economics of the fund match the investment model, to balance it with who your investor base is going to be, how you do the capital raising, how you do deal with capital calls, how you deal with distributions, doing the back office accounting. All of those things are things that you don't necessarily have to deal with in a syndication. So in many ways, there's just more plates that you have to spin in order to be able to be successful if you're doing it in a pooled fund format.
How is AI changing the game for everything you just said? Because the complexities and the moving parts, it feels like it's in a Rubik's Cube that you're probably constantly having to adjust daily, weekly, quarterly, where with these moving parts. So how is AI and or technology helping to aid in the efficiency of all of this?
Oh, for sure it is. I think it's a lot easier now to find information than you once did. It's a lot easier to set things up than perhaps people once did. Certainly when I started, you didn't have the advantage of some of those things. It's making the administration component easier. I think there's a lot more resources available to people today than there were, even as recently as, 10, 12 years ago when we really started doing a lot of the work, to help managers. So it's just made information is much more accessible. Things can happen much more quickly, and it doesn't take nearly as long to get something started from scratch the way that it used to.
And specifically like ChatGPT or any of these newer AI models, are you using anything to help with the organization of the economics, the math, the performance, the projections? Anything there that is like, kind of cutting edge that you feel like, because it still daunting, right? If you have just a joint venture LLC model with a set number of investors, right? And then you're moving to this whole dynamic moving, vehicle. It's not a static, right? Is there anything that specifically you say, yes, Brett, this is starting to make it more streamlined and automated?
Yeah, well, I think the preparation of the documents can happen a lot more quickly once you understand the structure. I still think that I haven't figured out how to use AI to be able to effectively match the individual person's location and strategy and size and number of deals with the economic structure of the fund and the investor base, because that can vary considerably depending on whether you're trying to attract institutional investors or whether you're attracting individual investors. But once you kind of work through that first component of it, then everything can happen a lot more quickly, because you can repurpose a lot of old documents. And, lawyers used to do that all the time anyway, but very manually. Now it happens a lot faster. So I still think the consultative part of it in the beginning to make sure that you've got the right structure is very manual and human. But after that, you can use AI to kind of significantly speed your course to get to launch.
Okay, got it. By the way, speaking with Matt Burk, you can find him going to verivest.com. That's VERI, vest.com, VERI, vest.com. Increase your odds of winning in your next deal. Launch, capitalize, and scale your real estate fund with confidence. By the way, they have $3 billion of assets under management, 300 plus advisory engagements, and a $10 million average raised by clients in the first 12 months. And the most importantly, 30 years of experience. So we talked about, committed, being committed, really saying like, this is like, hey, this is long-term. This is kids that are, this is a baby that's being born. You got to take it through infancy, through toddler, through elementary school, help it to really grow and thrive. That's the first secret. What's the number two secret from advancing from syndication to the fund model?
I think understanding where and how you're going to raise the money is important. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about if I heard this a lot, Brett, is that if I set up a fund, then I'll have the money there to be able to just move real quick and get a deal closed and so forth. And that just because you set the fund up, it's not an if you build it, they will come type thing. You need to really understand how you're going to raise the money. That can be very hard to do because a lot of times people who have, of course, they've been successful at some level, right, doing individual syndications, so they wouldn't even be considering a fund. But I have found that a lot of investors who put money into a single individual deal are not necessarily going to also invest in a what's called a blind pool fund, right, where they don't understand or they don't have direct knowledge of which assets are going to be acquired by the manager. So having a clear idea of how you're going to do that, and typically that involves, Brett, in my experience, you want to have more than one person. So you'll generally have someone who's focused exclusively or almost exclusively on the capital raise side, a principal, and someone else who's focused on the real estate side.
Okay, got it. So this is huge. I think this is the biggest thing, right? It sounds like where and how are you going to raise the money, right? This is not if you build or open a fund, the money will come, right? It's having that focused performance track record of someone raising capital, having raised capital, having them continue to do that, and one person exclusively focused on the real estate, acquisitions or perhaps the operations and all of those things that go into there. I want to dig into this a little bit more, right? What are the best that are raising capital today? Because I feel like capital is oxygen right now. And what I mean by that, I don't mean debt. I mean equity, right? Like hard cash you put into deals. What are the best doing to do it in 2024? Because it seems like a lot of people are starving for oxygen and they're running out of breath here.
Yeah, and there's no easy answer, as you well know, to that question. I do think that certainly the longer you've been doing it, the more track record you have, the easier it gets. I also think the more you've moved upstream, that family offices tend to be better sources of capital in times like this because they have the money. They tend to be more sophisticated. They understand that now is getting to the point where it's a good time to buy because quite likely you're going to be buying at discounts. Whereas individual high net worth investors, are a less reliable source of capital in times when things are challenging and difficult. So there is no magic bullet. That's what I tell people. There's no panacea. There's no one thing to do. I think it varies depending on where you come from, what resources you have, how big your circle of influence is, and with whom. And that is back to your question around, individual consultative stuff, right? It's not an AI question to be able to say it really depends on where they come from and what access they have and who they know and how big that circle is. And in many cases, the answer, Brett, is like, you probably shouldn't start a fund, right? If you can't raise the money or you don't have enough deal flow, or you're just not sure where you're going to get it, then